Hello. How is everyone doing tonight as we enter into the dark, cold part of our year? You know, we've been doing these programs for so long and you're like, oh, it's 7 o'clock. It's bright out still. And no, it is definitely dark and cold. My name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee. I am so excited to be with you tonight for this very important conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our presentation on environmental justice, exploring the intersection of race, waste, and health. If you have any technical challenges during the presentation, please use the chat feature to let us know, and someone from the programs team will attempt to assist you. Although your microphones will remain muted, please submit your questions for the presenter also using chat. So we will be taking those questions. We want to hear from you. I know many of you have already donated to support this program. If you haven't and are able to, we ask that you donate to the museum so that we can continue to offer exciting programs like this. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our partners, Milwaukee Public Library, who are co-sponsoring this program with us, and this program, which has been funded in part with a grant from the Wisconsin Humanities, with funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities in the state of Wisconsin. When we knew we were doing this exhibit on scrapyards, which is up through January 30th, we were really excited about the opportunity to explore a lot of the complex issues that come up with scrap. And one of those is the majority of scrapyards are in areas where marginalized communities live, and waste has differential impacts on communities of color. And we wanted to explore that. And we also wanted to explore the legacy of Wisconsin environmentalism. So we're delighted that you could be here for that conversation. It's now my pleasure to turn things over to our wonderful program partner from Milwaukee Public Library, Amy Waldman. Amy is a reference librarian at the Good Hope branch of the Milwaukee Public Library, one of the best places on earth. She also writes regularly for the Wisconsin Jewish Chronicle and is a member of Jewish Museum Milwaukee. So Amy, take it away.
I'm gonna unmute here. Hello. Thank you, Ellie, Cassie, and panelists, especially everyone here tonight. So the Milwaukee Public Library's mission statement is inspiration starts here. We help people read, learn, and connect. And while Scrapyard Innovators of Recycling, the exhibit, is something that is inspirational that started outside the library, we are really thrilled to help people read, learn, and connect with the exhibit, and to help provide resources for anyone who wants to take a deeper dive into something they find here and be part of programming like tonight's discussion. The Upcycled Library Take and Make project that our children's librarian, the one at my branch, so I'm really happy about that, made for kids. It's a Hanukkah menorah. And then in a couple weeks, my colleague Beth is going to be helping with a book discussion. So we're really, really happy to be partnering. And we also have a ton of our own great programs at the library, but I'm only going to showcase two. I'm going to be very restrained. I'm going to talk about two of our book clubs, the Climate Action Book Club and Coming to America Book Club. The Climate Action Book Club meets from 6 to 7 on the last Monday of the month, and this month's book is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. The Coming to America book group approaches American identity as an evolving and an ongoing conversation, exploring questions of identity, assimilation, and other aspects of life in the United States. And full disclosure, it is my book club. Our next meeting is November 17th at 5:30, and we're reading Homeland Elegies by Ayad Akhtar. You can find more information about those and other programs on our website, and you can register there. It's www.mpl.org. In addition to a handout I created for tonight's program that you will be getting, the library has a book list associated with the exhibit, which I can put into the chat. And Tia Nelson shared a link to a website with extensive information about her father and the events that led up to the first Earth Day in 1970 and all that came after. And I will also put that in the chat. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you Tia Nelson, who is an internationally recognized as a tireless champion for environmental stewardship and climate change education. She spent 17 years with the Nature Conservancy, including as the first director of the Global Climate Change Initiative. In 2004, Nelson served as executive secretary to the Wisconsin Board of Commissioners of Public Lands, which included a gubernatorial appointment as co-chair of Wisconsin's Task Force on Global Warming. Tia.
Well, thank you for your kind introduction, Amy, and thank you to the museum for this important exhibit. I must say that the history surprised and inspired me. Just a brief history on the first Earth Day, which was 51 years ago, and my father's life. He was a little boy, grew up in a small town in northern Wisconsin, and he had really big dreams that were inspired by his parents engaging him and involving him in following political leaders as a child. And when he was 10 years old, he drove in a Model T Ford with my grandfather from Clear Lake to Amory, Wisconsin, where he saw Bob La Follette speak out of the back of a whistle-stop train. He was 10 years old, and he decided then and there that he wanted to grow up and help people, make a difference in the world, and that a pathway for that, having that kind of impact would be to grow up and be a U.S. Senator. He did tell his dad on the drive home he was worried that by the time he was grown up, Bob La Follette would have solved all the world's problems and there wouldn't be anything for him to do. Obviously, that did not turn out to be the case. Many people know that my father worked throughout his long life of public service as a state senator, as a governor, and as a United States senator to help ensure everyone's rights to breathe clean air and drink clean water. Those rights remain elusive for many still today, especially marginalized communities. And I think when I reflect on my father's legacy as the founder of Earth Day, an event that was multi-generational, it was bipartisan, and it included a very strong call to action on social justice and civil rights. And I think that the environmental community failed to hear and fully embrace that original call to action until fairly recently. What I'd like to do here is just show a very brief video clip. This is my father speaking in Milwaukee on the eve of the first Earth Day in 1970. And we'll talk about it after we watch. Cassie, if you could roll it for us, that'd be great.
It's tremendously encouraging to see all across this country the remarkable interest on the campuses and off the campuses on an issue which is not only just an issue of survival, but an issue of how we survive. I don't think there's any other issue viewed in its broadest sense which is as critical to mankind as the issue of the quality of the environment in which we live. You hear the word ecology. That's a big science, not a narrow one. It's a big concept, and it is concerned with all the ramifications of all the relationships of all living creatures to each other and their environment. It is concerned with the total ecosystem, not just how we dispose of tin cans, bottles, and our garbage. It is concerned with the habitat of marine creatures, animals, birds, and man. And our goal is not just an environment of clean air and water and scenic beauty, while forgetting about the worst environments in America, in the ghettos, in the Appalachians, and elsewhere. Our goal is an environment of decency, quality, and mutual respect for all human beings and all other living creatures. An environment without ugliness, without ghettos, without poverty, without discrimination, without hunger, and without war. Our goal is a decent environment in its broadest and deepest sense. And winning the environmental war is a whole lot tougher challenge by far than any other challenge ever to confront mankind. We could terminate our involvement in Laos in 30 days, and it's my belief we should. And we could terminate our involvement in the killings in Vietnam in 120 days, and I think we should. But wish for it, work for it, fight for it, commit unlimited resources to it nevertheless. The battle to restore a proper relationship between man and his environment, between man and other living creatures, will require a long, sustained political, moral, ethical, and financial commitment far beyond any commitment ever made by any society in the history of man. Are we able? Yes. Are we willing? That's the unanswered question.
Thank you, Cassie. So it's most interesting to me that the way my father described what ecology meant to him on the eve of the first Earth Day. And he specifically references it's not just about how we dispose of our tin cans and our bottles. It wasn't a particular social norm at that time for individuals to be recycling in their homes. And I think it's unfortunate that it has taken the environmental community so long to embrace that broader message. I found a written copy of his speech, and he gave some version of that many times that first Earth Day, but in a written copy I found in his papers, he talks about ecology being a big science, not a narrow science, as he did in that clip, and goes on to say it involves rats in the ghetto and public housing unworthy of its name. What we want to do this evening is allow for some conversation around this challenging question of social justice, race, and the environment, where we've been, where we are now, where we need to go to achieve this broad vision that I've talked about here and that my father talked about for most of his life. What I'd like to do is bring in Brenda Coley to join us in this conversation and help us think about some of these challenges. Brenda is co-director of the Milwaukee Water Commons and has a long and very distinguished career advocating for social justice issues and helping giving voice to the voiceless and helping empower marginalized communities. And if we could bring Brenda in now, that would be great. And then I'll be introducing Gary Besaw, my dear friend. But first, Brenda.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me join this discussion. I want to thank the Jewish Museum for inviting me. And I also want to pay homage and give respect really to Tia Nelson and the work that she's done. I'm honored to be on this panel with her and the legacy that she continues to grow from her father. As you know, I'm co-executive director of Milwaukee Water Commons. We're a cross-cultural, cross-neighborhood water organization that engages people around stewardship and care of the water. We have a water city agenda that that has 6 initiatives around water, as well as having programs under these initiatives. I've did find it interesting to hear Gaylord Nelson talk about what we are beginning to see evolve in the movement, which is people and planet. And I have been actually doing a little bit of research and come to surprise that before the 1970s, between the early 1900s and the 1970s, what we call intersectionality around issues of the environment, along with the environment that people live in, the city, those kinds of issues were more connected than, and became disconnected after the 70s. Unions worked on environmental issues across our country. And so we really have to, I was thinking we had to get to a new place. What we have to do is get back to our roots around environmentalism. So it was, I was happy to hear Tia bring her father into the conversation around those issues of people and planet. And, you know, that's when we talk about environmental justice, which is place-based and intersectional as well. I have a film, a little short film to introduce Milwaukee Water Commons to you, and I believe Cassie will play that for us.
Earth belongs to everyone and to no one. And that with the commons, we have shared responsibility to make sure that our planet, that our earth, and in particular what we focus on, water, is healthy and that we steward the water. So we have a responsibility to the water, as the water has been a gift and a blessing to us. Hi, my name is Brenda Coley, and I'm the co-executive director of Milwaukee Water Commons. The way that we organize, we use 3 to 4 frameworks: the Commons philosophy, environmental justice, collective impact, and community engagement. Frameworks really help guide us. If we are thinking of an activity that we're going to do, we're going to look at these frameworks to tell us if we are within those boundaries. We also look at our work, the issues we take on, through an environmental justice lens, to be sure that the most vulnerable communities, people of color, indigenous people, are thought of well when we're taking this stand or we're doing this work.
At Milwaukee Water Commons, we're really proud of our annual events. We have 3 events that happen every year: the Confluence, the Cream City Classic, and We Are Water. And there are times that we really bring the community together to celebrate our shared water and to tell stories about our connections to water, to highlight work that's been done, and model what it looks like to be a truly water-centric city. Celebration, bringing the arts, bringing our cultural perspective is critical to the work that we're trying to do at Milwaukee Water Commons.
Water City Agenda was really an example of community engagement for Milwaukee Water Commons around this idea of Milwaukee becoming a water-centric city. So folks generally speak about Milwaukee as a water-centric city, which makes sense because of its position on Milwaukee's 3 rivers and on the shore of Lake Michigan. But what we had seen through our organization was that the community was not really engaged in deciding how Milwaukee really was becoming poised as a water-centric city. The conversation was more about technologies and businesses, which is an important component, but it didn't center community priorities. The Water City Agenda was an attempt to bring together the community to say, if we're going to have a water-centric city, what does that mean to you? What we did was ask 1,300 Milwaukee residents to put their input into what it meant for them, for Milwaukee to have a relationship with water. And then through public input process, through engagement, we were able to whittle that down into 6 core initiatives that would guide some of the work that we would do to really advocate on behalf of Milwaukee's communities. Those initiatives were green infrastructure, water quality, blue-green jobs, arts and culture, education and recreation, and drinking water. Those were some of the core priorities that synthesize all of the input that we got from really just getting out into community events and hearing from folks about how they connected to water. I'm always amazed how often folks will discuss community priorities and things that they see being issues in other systems, as transportation systems, economic systems, public health systems, and think that that's separate from our waterways. But what we really found out with the Water City Agenda was that there are deep connections between the way that we relate to our environment and the way that we think about our relationships to each other.
because baptism is something that we do every Sunday within worship. And when we do our confession and forgiveness, it's around baptism. So we're constantly making the link to water in our sacred lives and it being a sacred thing to how we live and how we show up in the world. We were real excited to learn more about how we could be better stewards of water ecology, and then also just learning more about Milwaukee River, the tributaries, and also Lake Michigan. When we prompted folks in our congregation about who would be interested in that, we actually had to pare them down and say, okay, we can't have a team that large. And so it was really a great response. Our congregation and the people that we were able to talk to really have a better understanding of just the everyday small things that you can do that make major impacts, let alone then, of course, the advocacy to our legislators about not dumping into our lakes and our rivers. Also just realizing how important it is to just the whole entire ecosystem.
Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion we'll have in a few minutes.
Oh, thank you for that inspiring video about your work, Brenda, and the work of the Milwaukee Water Commons. I look forward to learning more about that, and I'll bring you back in to join us in a conversation about some of these challenging issues and what each of us can do to make a difference, to contribute to the cause. I mean, I want everyone to keep in mind, you know, Earth Day wasn't successful just because my father gave a great speech and that he was a great orator and leader. All of those things are true, but Earth Day was successful because of the response of the grassroots. 20 million people responded to my father's call to action on that first Earth Day. That's what made it the success that it was. Individuals acting in their communities to protect their rights to clean air and clean water. And so it's really the genius of Earth Day is that sense of empowerment and agency that individuals came to feel. And that to me is an exciting and hopeful message about the power of individual action. I'd like now to introduce Gary Besaw. I'm happy to call a friend. Gary's a member of the Bear Clan of the Menominee Nation. He is a longtime environmental leader and currently is director of the Menominee Tribal Department of Agriculture and Food. Gary, it's really great to have you with us, and I'll do my best to facilitate a conversation between you and me and Brenda after your presentation. Take it away, please.
Yes, Cassie, can we show the video first? It's 3 minutes.
We can't open Pandora's box here next to this beautiful river, next to our ancestors, and put at risk that great resource that we Americans know as our Great Lakes. Our creation, our origin, came at the mouth of the Menominee River. The Menominee then have a responsibility for the sturgeon, for the wild rice, for the waters. We're connected, we're a part of. If this proposed mine goes through, the Menominee lose our sacred home base, our origin. We lose some of the remains of our ancestors that since our creation have been in the ground. We have remains in that area. We have mounds, we have dance rings, and some of the raised bed gardens that had been there. These all fall within or in proximity to the footprint of the mine. How dangerous, irresponsible, immoral, absurd to propose a mine 150 feet away from a river that feeds into the Great Lakes. The only freshwater source larger than the Great Lakes in this whole world are the polar ice caps. If you can imagine 5.5 football fields, 2.5 Statue of Liberties deep, a hole in the ground, somewhere they have to put those tailings, and that's on that site. And remember, sulfur, when it interacts with water and air, it creates sulfuric acid. The damage that would come from this is long-term and irreversible. The Menominee are continuing in this big fight for our ancestors, and we fight for the river and the environment. Everybody should be screaming at the top of their lungs in trying to protect against this terrible risk to the Great Lakes area.
And thank you for playing that. And I did that. I'm a recovering tribal chairman. I've served several terms as our tribal chairman for the Menominee Nation. And I can start with, we're told in our way that we need to put ourselves in context so you know how we are, where we come from and how we see that world. So in the Tanwa Makana Scott Palace and as we see it, Totem and Yawa Awasa, Menominee and Nanny Nisitni, the Tawum, the God Magic. I said, first of all, greetings, my relatives, because indeed we're all related in our way. When we say our prayers, everybody is included within that, because all things are living, and all things have feelings, and all things are alive, and we do that, and we also pray for all of the parts of creation, because we are indeed all connected. I said my name that I pray with every day, and I hope we all know that there is a greater power, and we all pray, and we all are thankful for what we have. But my name is Oscar Powis. That's the name I pray with. That says that I'm a messenger and translator. That's what that means in Menominee. I also said that I'm of the Bear Clan. And you heard when we talked about those clans, those animals coming from under the water, from where water is life. Indeed, Brenda, exactly. Water is life. And this is so indicative of that. That's where we come from, the mouth of the Menominee River. That's the interstate boundary waters between Wisconsin and Upper Michigan. So by Marinette, Menominee, and up that river, that's where we come from. We have no migration story. We always were here. That's what our stories tell us. And Wisconsin, by the way, comes from our Menominee word, Wiscosik. That's a Menominee word. That means good land, a good place to live. That's what that means. And I pray we can always keep that designation, and we always have that meaning for it. So I also said I'm but a common man. So I'm here speaking as Gary Besaw, as Oscar Powis, the Menominee man. I'm but a common Menominee man. I'm not speaking for the tribe as our tribal chairman today. Remember, I'm recovering from that. So what we're told is when we look at this potential mine coming forward, it's it behooves us to think that we would put at risk all of those animals, all of the people, all of the lives, all in future generations, put that risk forward when there are options. And you heard that spoken of. There are options for other types of ways to look at recycling and other methods. In our way, we have our real name for ourselves is others called us Menominee or Menominee. That means people of the wild rice. That's what when the French fur traders come over and the Ojibwe who come from the East Coast, when they come here, they asked our names and they said, well, those are the French fur traders asked our names. They said, well, those are, they asked in the Ojibwe said, well, it's Menominee. Those are wild rice people, because that was a large part of our diet. We call ourselves something else. We are Gaius Mamachitawak. That means the ancient ones. We've found, archaeologists have findings of over 14,500 years ago that even predate the Bering Strait theory. So they have findings here of human tools and of butchering animals that carbon date back to that time. And we believe we are correct in how we approach things. We've been told that we are connected. We need to live sustainably. So on our reservation right now, we went from over a land base of over 12 million acres and through treaties down to 235,000 acres. And back when we were told, back when we could still communicate with animals, we had a compact with them that they would take care of our babies and we would take care of theirs. So we know that one of the worst things that we can do is take away habitat. So we know there needs to be limits in how we do that. So Menominee people struggle with looking at how we approach this. So I'm very interested to see what this discussion brings forward. I'm very, very honored to be here with some of my heroes. And I thank the Jewish Museum for asking me to come forward and be part of this great event.
Thank you, Gary. I learned, it was just a few years ago, what the origins of the concept of the seventh generation thinking from indigenous and Indian tribes in the United States about making decisions today that with consideration of 7 generations forward, foremost in our mind. Gary, feel free to jump in if you're so moved. Brenda, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what, just as a practical matter, for someone who's organizing in communities in Milwaukee around key environmental issues, especially in this case, water issues, what you see as the greatest challenges are, and how others can help advance the cause that you have dedicated yourself to. And if you had, in addition to that, if you had thoughts on how we've sort of lost the connection that we're regaining now and seeking to grow and amplify this connection between social justice, community well-being, and environmental well-being. If you could just reflect a little on the challenges as you see them, the ways for people to get involved, and how you think this disconnect has come to be and what we do to heal it, I suppose.
Those are lots of big questions, and
Yeah.
I'll try my best to give some of my thinking and insight on it. But I want to say first off, I don't have the answers. I have some thinking, I have some experiences, but this is very complicated mess that we find ourselves in. If you want to talk about some of the historical challenges that we have and what I think broke us apart is, Milwaukee Water Commons believes that people have been disengaged from the community, from the water in particular, through no fault of their own. I mean, the truth is we live in a highly segregated city, and waterways, Lake Michigan was a part of that segregation as well. And in many ways, for example, people didn't have a chance to connect with the water. One of the ways that they did it in urban settings is we have natatoriums and swimming pools and places for people to swim, and they could connect to the water that way, learn how to swim and be safe. And those were all due to segregation, and in some ways were shut down so that Black and white in particular, that's that dichotomy, would not be together in those pool situations. So we have issues around pool closures. And if you look at it now, it's like a donut. All the pools are outside of the Black community, and for people to recreate. So we've been disengaged from the water through issues of segregation, which compounded other issues as well. So the challenge is really that we need, and we're beginning to have a cultural shift around who belongs to the water. The pandemic was a way to really show us a lot of the disparities that exist, but we saw African Americans and Latino folks recreating outside more than ever before. And so that was a huge eye opener for us. But there were safety issues down at that lake. And we had, I believe, 3 or 4 African American men who died at McKinley Beach during the pandemic, trying to save children. So water safety is a huge issue. It's an environmental justice issue that we have to contend with. I think that when we talk about the environmental movement, I think actually I've become to realize that we really need an environmental movement, and we have to act like a movement. And that means we have to have strategies and tactics and ways to engage people. We have to tell the story around the environment where people relate to it, and we're actually reflecting back their story. So that means we have to engage with the community, we have to be authentic, and we have to be transparent, and we have to, in my view, bring them in the beginning and not to the end. We're not trying to diversify a white space any longer. We're really trying to pull that back and really together, all of us, create something new. And I think that's really the way that we want to go. I believe the challenges exist, as in every movement, that we have to listen to the community. We believe that's where the innovation is. And so we have to engage them in these issues in a way, educate them so that they can make informed decisions. And our job as people who are in the nonprofit world, who have a certain amount of privilege, that when we get in these rooms where policymakers and decision makers are, that we bring our communities with us. So, I mean, that's sort of a broad brush to some of the things that you asked me about, Tia.
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. I know sort of a loaded series of questions. As you were speaking, I thought of thinking of one of my favorite books that I'm reading right now. I'm reading several, but one of them is by Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. It's titled Saving Us. And Catherine is a climate scientist and evangelical Christian. And I love the title of her book because it really it reframes the question of what we're doing here, right? We're not saving the planet, we're saving the viability of the human species to thrive and prosper now and in future generations.
There is no planet B.
Yeah, and in harmony with the planet. So we're saving us. I highly recommend the book, and I provided it as a suggested resource to be shared with the audience, because Catherine talks a lot about connecting to people, meeting them where they are, and connecting through stories that resonate for them. And as I worked for a long time on climate change, really challenging issue to communicate on. People have a lot of worries on their mind. The climate science can feel intimidating. Today, the issue has become, unfortunately, divisive and political. And I remind people and often surprise them. I have a series of videos which Newt Gingrich is sharing a stage with Nancy Pelosi, and the two of them are saying they don't agree on much, but they do agree we have to address the issue of climate change. The primary message of Catherine's book, which I think really does a good job of sort of looking at the psychology of how you reach people where they are through their stories that are relevant to them in their communities, to engage them and involve them in setting a path forward and envisioning a brighter future and being a part of that, of building that brighter future. It is through those stories. The book is a great sort of study in psychology and in persuasion, and I highly recommend it. But it is through those stories. I've said around climate change, I don't need a mother who's trying to get their child breakfast and get them off to school someday doesn't need to know Science 101. They do need to know that the reason a kid can't go to school today because it has asthma and is having an asthma attack is because the coal plant down the street, right? That's a story that's based in their community and is relevant to her, the challenges that mother faces in caring for their kid. And so it's through our stories that we can touch hearts and minds and engage and persuade and involve people in building that brighter future. Gary, if you'd like to comment here about some of your work. I've been up to the Menominee Forest just once, went up to look at the forestry operation there that's so respected. And I understand that you can see the Menominee forest from space.
Wow. Yeah, and that's one of the concerns that indeed we do have. Yes, we have that, but we're even told, you're like this beautiful salad bowl sitting out in the midst of farmland. We have invasives that are coming, especially as the climate warms now. There are types of invasives coming through, be they animals, be they insects, be they other types of plants. They have no enemies, and just moving 2 degrees makes them get past that tipping point where now they can be on the reservation and they can survive. so they have no natural enemies. We are seeing those types of things on the reservation now. You know, we struggle. Okay, well, we're recording. But we find that there has to be those negotiated trade-offs between what we would consider wants and what we consider needs. And it has to come to that conclusion. We were told once, looking at the forest, they said, hey, with the carbon market, Menominee, you easily could be the highest price. You could demand the highest price for your forest on that carbon market. You know, you'd be making millions. But what we've come back and said was, the world is smaller than you think. It's a system. And if we buy those carbon credits, then that's allowing somebody additional pollution, additional carbon that they could put out. So we struggle with that, and we say, no, we can't do that. We're going to keep our forest, and it is a great carbon sink. It's one of the lungs of Wisconsin, but we're not going to change that, and not for any other reason except we know that's the right thing to do, and that is part of that compact that we have with the natural world.
Yeah, Gary, just for the benefit of the audience, I thought I'd just point out, you and I have both spent a lot of time thinking about the carbon cycles, climate change, its impacts here in Wisconsin. What are the threats that climate change poses to us, and the risks and opportunities to address those threats? But a lot of people probably don't know that our forests here in Wisconsin, and you were speaking specifically of the remarkable Menominee forests, are sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, storing it as carbon, and serving as, in essence, a place where the carbon from global warming pollution, a portion of it is stored in our forests, another portion is stored in our oceans. And the forest and the sustainable management of that forest is playing a critical role both in habitat and in mitigating climate change. And I'm a big admirer of the work up there. We're going to go into the question and answer period momentarily. I encourage the audience to ask any of us their questions or comments. Brenda, do you want to make any closing comments before we go into the Q&A period about your work and your challenges, and where do you see opportunity for growth today?
Well, Tia, first I want to highlight and let people know that this month is the 30th anniversary of the first National People of Color Environmental Summit, and which was held in Washington, D.C. And it really was an extraordinary convergence of people who have now still a lasting effect on the environmental justice movement. And as 6 people from Wisconsin attended, with representation from the Oneida tribe, the Menominee tribe, people from La Crosse, and in particular, I want to highlight Ann Wilson, who works in housing, who was at in Milwaukee at that meeting as well. And I say this to say that we have people of color, indigenous folks have been working on environmental issues all along. And I just hope that is dispels any notion that we are not interested in the environment, that we're too busy for the environment, and we're dealing with other challenges as well. So I just want to put that out there, although that has been slowly ebbing. I think the challenge is, you know, we have one of the issues in Milwaukee around water is changing out the lead laterals. We have probably the greatest water from Lake Michigan. Our water system, our water sector, waterworks treats that water well until it hits the pipes. And then we have the risk of lead tainted water. And we know that there's money coming from the federal government, but it really is a matter of working with the city and the state to get this done. And this is an environmental justice issue, although those pipes were not, you know, put in the ground because where people of color live, but now it's an old housing stock and we have to do something about it. And this is an environmental justice issue because Milwaukee, it really helped assist the suburbs in their water infrastructure. We helped pay for it. And
Yeah.
now the outlying cities and states don't want to be reciprocal. And that's an issue that we really have to deal with. And at the same time, there was redlining where we couldn't move out into the suburbs if we wanted to, for especially African Americans. So these are these connections, these environmental justice issues that are connected and talk about people and planet. So we need some reciprocation. We need people to be talking about really there's no good reason, doesn't matter the reason why we don't have healthy or clean water, if it's PFAS, if it's contaminated groundwater from ag runoff. We all deserve clean and healthy water. And so we have to work together to make that happen.
Yeah, everybody should have the right to have the right and opportunity and access to turn on their kitchen sink and have access to clean drinking water and so on. No doubt. Thank you so much for those comments, Brenda. I can see that a question has come into the chat room. This one is for you, Gary. It's asking for the current status of the Back 40 mine.
Yes, and thank you. Yeah, back in January, as we fought through the administrative process in Michigan, their administrative law judge issued a finding to deny the wetland permit, partly because he found that, and we made that argument that the numbers they were using and the models they were using to propose what impacts would be happening were incorrect. We fought and we showed that those were not accurate. And so the wetlands permit was denied. And then in April, just a couple months later, they said, well, we're going to remand the whole mining permit back because part of that was the wetland permit that was encased within that whole mining permit. So that was sent back. And Aquila, who is this exploratory mining company from Canada, they then pulled back. They were going to appeal the whole mining and wetland permit process, but they pulled back. And currently there is no pending litigation nor contested case hearings involving the Back 40 mine. That said, though, so that's great. That was huge victory for Menominee. But that said, Aquila had just announced that they will be executing a sellout or merger to I don't know what they're called. Gold Resource Corporation is called Goro, and they are a larger entity, and they will be looking at moving this along again. And what they see as very attractive is if they can have this with the big processing facility at the Back 40 mine site, then that would allow them to economically rail in from other sites in Wisconsin, or that they can then do the processing at the Michigan site. So it's imperative that we keep this mining site out.
Yeah.
Now, what's of interest is Menominee has coming on November 19th, we have a National Historic Preservation Act Section 106 implication. We're looking at a National Register District designation because of all the mines and all of the things that are happening around that site, which includes the Back 40 mine site. We believe this will be on the National Register. So we're slowly making movement. This took years to get forward to this far. And part of it was political in the past administrations, both federal and Wisconsin state. So it's been able to move forward. And we think that will at least put more impediments in the way. Because if anything happens federally, any federal actions, then these need to be taken into consideration. So that's the next piece, but it's at least what we say is death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
We just keep fighting, just keep fighting.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that update, Gary. It's an important issue, not just for the tribe, but for many others. If you don't mind, Ellie, I would like to ask you a question. What would someone who visited the museum see at the exhibit space at the scrapyard exhibit? I know that I was very surprised when you guys invited me to be a part of this, and I was honored and delighted to be involved. Very surprised to learn that 80%, and you said this at the top of our program, that 80% of the scrapyards in America were operated by Jewish immigrants. And as we know, but if you could, just a few words, what would one experience if they visited the museum today to see that exhibit?
Great. Oh, I love that question. This is an exhibit that explores the history of scrapyards. So it starts with those immigrant roots and kind of why Jewish people got into scrap. And then it gets into some of the challenging questions about recycling today. Where does our recycling go? How do we deal with overseas exporting of scrap materials and then certainly one of the big questions around plastic. So it gets into both the kind of start, and actually there's this great quote that we have similar quotes from our community, but it's, basically these people started out as junk peddlers, and they went from junk peddlers to scrap processors, and from scrap processors to the recyclers of today, and seeing that evolution within a generation or even within, the same person's lifespan is a really interesting evolution to track, and so that's what we've been really excited to be able to show it. We've been excited to share stories like these and then to continue that throughout the run of this exhibit. I can see that we have a question, and Amy, I'm just going to jump in since I'm already talking, from Casey, who says, while I know each situation will be different, do you have recommendations or general questions to ask yourself, or what signs to look for to determine if a project or development proposal has been analyzed through an environmental justice lens? So is there a way of really knowing that we are seeing the unintended consequences for communities of color as we are looking at a new development, a new project?
I think that's a great question for Brenda.
I would think that probably one of the first steps you would that you would know if it was environmental justice vetted is to see if it is location based. Is it an issue? Is it a problem that actually exist in the community rather than in our own, what we're looking at, public policy a lot of times. So is that issue really relatable and related to the community? Is it a part of, have you had enough engagement or some engagement with the community you're trying to help, to be sure that it's an EJ issue or it's something that resonates with the community? One of the things that I would say is that, we have to look at the difference between, I say, solidarity with the community and charity. And when we're working in solidarity with the community, our gaze is outward. We're looking at the ramifications, we're testing it, we're engaging people around it, we're educating, we're looking at a problem and we're seeing it. And if you're thinking around charity, you're really inward. This is what I'm going to do for you. So you want to be sure that you have, I think, some relationship with the community that you're trying to help.
Yeah, that's the first thing that came to mind for me was, has there been a, genuine and authentic engagement with community representatives and community voices in the design of whatever the project activity might be.
Just one other thing, Tia, I'll say, when we first
please.
moved into the neighborhood that we're in, Lindsay Heights right now, we moved from the east side of Milwaukee, which is where traditional environmentalists generally are housed, office. We moved into Lindsay Heights, which is actually, in the middle of the African-American community. One of the things that we did was we really held a focus group where we talk with the community to find out what their issues were and to really check with them on some of our own thinking. So, we think this, does that resonate with you? And do you, and we presented we presented on climate, and we presented on clean drinking water, and we presented on flooding. And it was 3 organizations, not just Milwaukee Water Commons, there's 3 other organizations that did this, and we came together. And it was truly a uplifting situation for us. And we got a chance really to engage with folks, around these issues. So those are some of the things that we did. And we paid people to talk with us because we felt that they shouldn't be the only ones in the room not getting paid. I was there getting paid, everyone should be.
Yeah.
So, it was a token stipend, and, it wasn't much, but it showed that we appreciated the time that they took to talk with us on these issues that they were really very well versed on.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I don't see other questions from the audience.
I think Amy might have had a question, so I'm going to turn it to her if that's okay, Tia.
Of course.
But I also want to say, Tia, that Deneen put in the chat after watching the video, she said, "What an inspiration. Thank you for sharing the video, Tia." So I wanted to make sure that you got that. And I wanted to also tell you a couple of things, because I've actually been to the museum and seen the exhibit, and it's very interactive. So you can actually find out, you can get on a scale and find out the value of you if you were copper or plastic or aluminum. And there are a whole lot of other interactive things like that. So it's a really wonderful place to bring kids and to bring your inner kid too. But very, the thing that really struck me about the exhibit, one of the things was that there's a lot of documentation about the Jewish scrappers, but there were a lot of African Americans too in the junk business, and that history has not been as well documented, and that is noted in this exhibit. And I think that really needs to be said. And I actually live in the city, and I see scrappers, and there are a lot of African American scrappers to this day going around picking up things. And so the question I have is for each one of you, if you can tell us one thing that you think, the most important one thing that each one of us can do, that you see us being able to do to make an impact. And it doesn't have to be a big giant thing, but just something that each one of us could do to address this situation, the intersectionality.
I spend a lot of time thinking about this issue, and I've already mentioned Dr. Catherine Hayhoe in the book Saving Us. I'm a big fan of hers. I know what her answer would be, and I think it's a good and surprising one. And it's simply this: to talk about it, that to have the conversations about the challenges, these environmental challenges in our communities, how climate change is impacting us today and in the future, and to talk about it with our family, with our friends, with our neighbors, with especially with our elected officials and public servants. And me being the daughter of someone who lived in public service most of his life, my father, I'd say for those of us who are eligible to vote, voting is a really critical action. So to talk about and engage and use one's voice to identify what's important to you and your community, and to not forget to use that voice in exercising your rights to participate in our democracy.
Thank you.
So I can speak somewhat to that. I think it's important to really have a critical lens when you view anything in front of you. I mean, Brenda hit it right on the head when we talked about signs to look for if it's been analyzed through an environmental justice lens, and the location is indeed that. Back in the 80s, we had the Nuclear Regulatory Commission look at citing a nuclear mine depository under the granite bedrock under the Wolf River on a reservation and right next to it. And they couched that in the jobs that would create. And they talked in those types of lenses. And we were not involved within that. Now we know the UN, when they looked at the Delegation of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the UNDRIP, that they specifically talked about consultation practices, and they needed to be free, prior, and informed consent with Indigenous peoples. And we look for that today. It should be free, there should be no charge, informed, it should be correct, and it should be prior. We should get this not at the last second, but before, and it should be in the manner that we do it. So that is there. We see that as tribal peoples. Remember, we are basically, there's 576, I believe, tribal nations in the United States. And we collectively and individually, we have certain treaty rights or other types of protections that we can help to protect this world, protect it from ourselves. You know, just how that is. But I think that critical lens of seeing who's proposing it and looking at the laws that currently are on hand and how we can use those. There are so many that are available for us. I worry about things even like that, the definition for the waters of the United States, as that start moving, that has implications back on the Back 40 mine attempt. And when the Clean Water Act said, well, we can delegate certain authorities to dredge and fill wetlands, when they said that, and then the Trump administration through Secretary Pruitt then and EPA come back and they changed that definition of the waters, we look through that lens, and we understood what was happening and where that was going. So right now, Michigan and New Jersey are the two states that took that, what they call the that section 404, that delegation of authority, so they can administratively handle some of the dredge and fill on wetlands. So when we see the next steps where they lessen some of the other definitions around it, we aren't listened to. We know in the big picture, those things are destroying or will destroy what our future generations need. Therein lies that trade-off. Until they can make something better, there has to be a trade-off. We can recycle, we can look at there are other ways to do what we do. And oh, by the way, I don't need a car that can park for me and all the extra metals that would cost. So there are those kinds of trade-offs, and we need to be critical about looking at all of these types of things that talk about additional wants that we're talked into. So that was my long story, sorry.
And thanks for sharing, Gary.
Brenda,
Go ahead.
do you want to bring us home and then we'll wrap up for the evening?
Sure. I don't have a whole lot more to add because I think what Gary and Tia were saying is right on the mark. I will reiterate some of the things that they said very briefly. You know, I want to reiterate, as Gary was talking about, that environmental justice is place-based, it's locational. And so EJ issues, environmental justice issues, are tied to the community. So it's important that we know what those issues are, what is on the minds of the community. I also would say that one thing a person can do regarding EJ and its intersectionality, as Tia said, is really to talk about it. And because we don't talk about these issues and we don't talk about these intersections enough. And we are the influences in our neighborhood, in our family, in our community. We are the leaders, we are the influencers, and people are going to be speaking to us and taking into account what we have to say and what we can bring to the party more than someone on television. So I think we should speak into that position that we have due to the work and the thinking we have with the community.
I want to thank everyone so much for their presence, their attendance, and then also thank you, especially Tia, Brenda, Gary. You guys are just phenomenal. You're so inspirational, and it's been so helpful to lay out a framework for understanding these very complex issues. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I also want to let people know that yes, the museum is open. Coming out, we know it's a little bit of a schlep for Garrett and for Tia, who are not in Milwaukee, but the rest of you, if you're in our area, we'd love to see you. We have Amy has her book list. I think it'll be reposted again, and I do believe that the Saving Us was on there as well. We have some great programs coming up. This Sunday, we actually have two. One of them is a community textile recycling day. So you can bring, textiles are incredibly hard to find places to take them to. You can bring them to us this Sunday and get $2 off admission to the museum. And we are excited to be able to partner with Better Earth Textile Recycling to provide this service. We're also doing a Greener Hanukkah. It's a virtual DIY upcycled menorah workshop. You can pick up your kit at a bunch of different local libraries or Jewish Museum Milwaukee. It is a fabulous fireless menorah that you can make in preparation for Hanukkah, which is early this year. And we hope that we'll be able to see you there. And then this Sunday from 1 to 2, we'll be having a virtual tour and demo. Finally, we have one more program in November. It's November 18th. Author Adam Minter will be joining us to talk about his book, Junkyard Planet, which will look at the global implications of recycling and scrap. We love having you guys around. Thank you so much for your involvement. And thank you, Tia, Brenda, and Gary. And thank you, Amy and Milwaukee Public Library, for helping us share and promote this program. Have a lovely evening.